Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This is episode number 23. We've managed to persuade 23 people to come on the show and chat to us about their projects, their initiatives, what they're doing across the UK. The Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast is brought to you by the Hare Krishna Project, which is a national preaching initiative to we're all trying to try and share Krishna consciousness with a new audience. And I'm super pleased and super excited to welcome our guest this week, Chaitanya Lila. Hare Krishna.
Hi, Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Thank you for agreeing to come on the show this week. It's wonderful to see you. We have been in communication with each other for a few months. We've been chatting about some of the things that we could talk about. And I was quite impressed with your kind of resume or CV, so to speak. Yeah. I have to admit, I've never had a proper conversation before with a hypnotherapist.
Right.
I certainly don't think
it's a normal conversation, just like it with anyone else.
You know, when I was a kid, we used to watch Paul McKenna on the TV, hypnotherapy, and it was kind of this kind of weird and wacky thing with the fancy music. So to have a hypnotherapist on this show is quite a good thing.
Do or say, or
kind of click your fingers and we're all, everyone's going to go to sleep. So you're a hypnotherapist, you're a psychotherapist, and you've worked in mental health for 12 years.
Yeah.
Which is quite a long time, I think, to be working in mental health.
Well, I say that, I'm me and I work as a psychotherapist. I'm not a hypnotherapist. Yeah, this is my service. This is my life path in this life that I've got. Yes, I've been working, in mental health for that long.
Wow. So tell us a bit about you, where you're from, how long you've been involved with the Hare Krishna family, and your background. Tell us a bit about you.
Sure. Yes. So I was born into ISKCON, Krishna consciousness. And that was, a great blessing. Like, it's rare, and I'm ever grateful. When I talk about my own, connection with ISKCON, I always refer to my father, really, because, he joined ISKCON before I was born, and, first was initiated by Bhagavan, and then obviously he fell, but then, my father was just on a very strong spiritual quest, to find answers to life. And then, he came across Prabhupada's book, and then joined at the manor and kind of developed. He got married to my mom, and then, and got more serious. And then, and then I was born. My spiritual master is Hare Krishna Swami. And so he was heavily involved I'm from Coventry, so he was heavily involved in the temple at that time. And so he built up a relationship with my parents and the congregation there at the time. So, and he named me actually when I was born. So my birth name is actually being given by my Guru Maharaj as well. So he named me Chaitanya Priya. And then, and it's really has been great, being born into ISKCON. And I didn't go to gurukul, so I went to normal school, and but also had temple life and Krishna conscious home life. But it was more sort of at the age of 15, I started to read Prabhupada's books and chant of my own accord, of my own choice. So it was around 15 that I started to really I went through a difficult time, actually, personally. And what I turned to were the books that were in my home, which were Prabhupada's books, and chanting. So then I would say that was more of like, the real start to my spiritual life of my own volition. And I've been interested in psychology. And so I followed that like passion from my heart from a very young age. I've always been interested as a teen. I was always interested in you know, why people behave the way they do, and why does the mind, you know, act in the way that it does. And so I was always interested in people and the mind. So that just led me down psychology and psychotherapy, and yeah, so you know, now it's like blended the two, and it's sort of become quite a core part of my life, both Krishna consciousness and my work. So
it sounds fascinating, you know, in terms of the things that you do and the things that you've been involved with.
right.
Tell us a bit about your work in mental health, because certainly in the kind of public sphere, public domain, for at least 4 or 5 years, maybe more, mental health and having conversations about it have become very important. We hear the government, you know, the government talking about mental health and having better mental health. So, I mean, and so as far as I can remember, over 10 years ago, it wasn't something that was really talked about in public. So tell us about your job and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, currently I have a small private practice, but my full-time job at the moment is that I'm the head of the mental health and counselling department at a university here in the UK. So yeah, currently I manage staff who are counsellors and mental health advisors, and I also see the students there for treatment, for therapy. And so a lot of my work at the university at the moment is really educating staff members, other lecturers, other professors on mental health, how they can better support students. We are rolling out across the UK in universities, which is called the Mental Health Charter, which is they're trying to make universities a more mental health safe environment. So things like this, educating staff, so better support for students. And then the other elements of my job is managing risk. So obviously we experience a lot of students that have mental health breakdowns, suicide attempts, self-harm, and then everything kind of below that, which is depression, anxiety, trauma-related issues, everything underneath that basically. And that's on a spectrum from, severe to quite moderate. And we offer therapeutic support. We're in high demand, and we have low resources, which is just across the board everywhere. So we offer a short-term service at the university. And then, other roles that I've had in the past have been, in private practice. I've worked in Southeast London, which was really, intense. But I loved it, actually. So the kids that I would work there in PRUs, which are called pupil referral units. So they were sort of the students that would get kicked out of all the schools in the borough, and they would get sent to a pupil referral unit where basically they're students with really bad behavior and probably come from very broken homes. A lot of them are gang affiliated, prostitution, drug running, all those kinds of things. And so I worked with them as well in drug and alcohol and counselling. So that was interesting and really, it was great work. And so throughout my whole years, though, I won't go on in detail, but generally I work with adolescents and adults. Yeah, that's been my experience.
Okay. And you say that you do some private work and you support people privately as well. Yeah. In terms of the devotee community, in terms of ISKCON, is mental health something that is an issue amongst devotees? I mean, it's kind of an obvious question. I mean, people think that mental health affects a lot of people in different ways, but certainly in the devotee community, we don't really talk about mental health that much, or certainly it's not spoken about openly like in the kind of non-devotee community. Do you find that devotees also come to you seeking support and guidance?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. I wish I had sort of more time or more of me, because I do get requests, and because of my demanding job at the moment, I'm very limited in time. But yes, devotees do come to me, and I think there's a mix. I think mental health is being talked about more so now than, of course, it ever was before. But the thing is that just talking about mental health doesn't solve mental health. And I think, so what happens often is that people will express their mental health issues perhaps online, not necessarily just in the devotee community, but generally. And sometimes that can do more harm than good, because they're really exposing themselves and they're already vulnerable. And that, yes, it can be helpful to others. It can be relieving to themselves. But to really change what's going on psychologically really requires, work, self-reflection, support, understanding, and that can take time. And that's why, obviously I'm going to advocate therapy, because it just gives the individual a space to really address specifically the issues that are going on psychologically, just like you would go to a doctor if you had a stomach problem or something like that. So it really provides a time and a space to really just focus on that. And in the devotee community, I think that there's a mix. I think the younger generation are probably more aware and able to speak about these things. And you have cultural issues. So in the Indian community, it's a lot less talked about, especially in the older generation. It's a taboo, really, or it's just non-existent. Mental health issues is not really a thing. And often that's really because of the kind of upbringing that a lot of Asian families have had, in that, it's very authoritarian homes. You have a parent who's usually the father, very strict, tells the children what they should and shouldn't do. They'll get beaten if they don't listen. Very strict, rigid upbringings. And those children then grow up to be my parents and my generation's parents, where they find it difficult to communicate their emotions. They find it difficult to be emotionally available. And then and it's not really something that is talked about. And what happens, you have a split between the adults in the home and then the children in the home, which are our generation, now the generation that are, they're exposed to so many more liberal ideas, and mental health issues is something that you have to talk about. And then there's a conflict. And this is not just in Asian families. I've spoken to students at the university, from Nigerian backgrounds, where they find this conflict with the older generation. They can't talk about things, So if you think about it like, okay, the mind is, right, in the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about the mind is as fast as the wind, or faster than the wind. So if you think about like the wind is, okay, it has to go in a current. The mind also has its own current, and it will go in whatever direction it's being sort of conditioned to go in. But then when there's a block, right, it will cause a problem. Yeah. So just like if you were to block the wind, it will cause a high amount of energy in one area. It's the same thing with the mind. If you just kind of block it, stop it from flowing in its natural course, then, or it's just not able to be expressed, and then it causes a stuckness, right? And that stuckness is what will in one sense cause a kind of buildup of energy, and if it's a negative energy, buildup of toxins, right? So, and if that can't be expressed, then what happens to that person? They just kind of stagnate mentally, psychologically. The issues aren't resolved. And where does that go? That energy has to go somewhere. Usually it comes out in unhealthy ways, in unhealthy addictions, or it gets really stuck in the body and creates disease. So yeah, it's a real problem if people can't talk about in their homes, in their family, in their community, just to be themselves and have somewhere they can go to talk, just reveal their heart and mind, right? That's one of the 6 loving exchanges of devotees, to reveal one's mind. That's really important. Yeah.
Can you give us maybe just a general insight and understanding of some of the mental health issues that devotees will come to you about, in terms of the devotee community? What are some of those mental health issues?
Yeah. Well, there's gurukul abuse issues that have come to me, domestic violence, I mean, other than the general depression, anxiety, trauma, right, from childhood or their past, those come, yes, right, general depression, anxiety, trauma, addictions. But then I would say specifically that, I guess devotees can relate to, more specifically to our movement, interesting issues like being controlled or suppressed by their mentor, like that, things like that. Not feeling like a lot of devotees feel this pressure to be someone, because I think there's an issue in the movement of, if you are seen as someone popular, or let's say you're a great popular kirtanier, or you have a great, because the kirtanier sings fantastically, then they get a lot of opportunities to sing kirtan and lead kirtans. And then other devotees who perhaps don't naturally have singing abilities, but they really love kirtan, then get kind of pushed on the wayside, and they don't feel like they can offer that service to Krishna, right? They don't feel like they can sing, or they restrict themselves. And that kind of over time really builds self-esteem issues and an inferiority complex. And I do think that this issue, at least right now, is quite big, I think, especially with social media as well. People are putting themselves in the forefront. I mean, I have to use social media to show the work that I do, and it's really dangerous though, because social media really can impact one's mental health in the sense that of comparison, not feeling like, okay, I'm good enough because I don't get enough likes or views or followers or whatever. And then as devotees, especially in the younger generation, I think they really then define their sense of self-worth, their ability to serve, do their own service, is dependent on those things. And that's really sad, because we're a preaching movement, right? Prabhupada wanted to emphasize preaching, but what do you do if there's only, what do you do if there are certain people that get more of the opportunity, right, to talk about something or to lead kirtans? What does it do to other devotees? And there's like a real split between, I'm just a nobody kind of devotee, or I'm just a small devotee, rather than a big devotee, because the big devotees are opening temples, or they're leading kirtans, and they're do you see what I'm saying? And that really, the saddest thing, okay, on the psychological level, it really makes people doubt themselves massively, because they don't get the support that popular devotees do. But then really what's really sad is that they don't offer their own personal service to Krishna, because they don't feel like it's good enough. And I think that's really subtle. It's a subtle problem right now, but it's insidious. And it means that Krishna doesn't receive the service that he wants. He's waiting for his devotees to.
And I think, unfortunately, this kind of celebrity culture in ISKCON has kind of escalated and grown.
Yes.
Is that, you know, I mean, you and I could look at different kirtan things today on Facebook or YouTube, and it's generally the same handsome men and beautiful women that are leading the kirtan, and they're fantastic. But if you feel like you're not a handsome man or a beautiful woman, you feel like, you know, you're not going to kind of get a look in. You're not getting opportunity. Or
you don't sing with alaps now, or you don't have a beautiful voice, and
Sorry, my light just turned. It's fine. There's nothing spooky. I'm just going to turn the lights off. 1 second.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, you know, this celebrity culture, and when your original question is what devotees come to me with, and I think devotees have come to me with this issue, like self-doubt, not feeling good enough, not feeling like they're doing enough, right? Because they're comparing themselves online to other people who are getting the popularity. So that was your original question.
And I certainly, I mean, if I'm honest, I joined ISKCON initially in 2004. The first few years, a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, it's still a roller coaster now, but the first few years were a bit of a roller coaster. And I certainly felt that because I couldn't play the mridanga, and I don't play the mridanga, I felt that, I was never going to get a look in, or because I couldn't do this service or that service. Right. The first, I wouldn't say they were difficult. I'll be honest, I wasn't traumatized by it, but it was a difficulty that I went through, that I couldn't do these, and I'm not the best cook. I can't play a mridanga, so therefore I'm not good enough, or I'm not, and actually then when you read Srila Prabhupada's books and you understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, that use anything you've got to serve Krishna, our life necessarily isn't about giving things up. I mean, there's certain things that we shouldn't be doing, but it's about dovetailing our skills and our talents, whatever they are, for the service of Krishna, being less self-conscious and more Krishna conscious. And that's the baseline of Krishna consciousness. But absolutely, we have this unfortunate kind of celebrity culture in the Hare Krishna movement. There's just like the real world, the non-ISKCON world, whatever, interestingly, I found you mentioned two particular issues in terms of devotees coming to you for support. You talked about gurukul abuse, which we can talk about in a minute, and also particularly domestic violence, which, if I'm honest, it didn't surprise me when you said that. And I'm just wondering, I don't have any domestic violence stats with me now in terms of the general public or general population, but would you say, or do you know that particularly maybe in kind of Indian cultural families, Indian backgrounds, Asian background families, is domestic violence more of an issue?
I don't know the stats either. Even if I did have stats, I wouldn't necessarily trust them, because so many things are unreported because of the nature of domestic violence and the taboo around that. I would say that domestic violence issues in the Asian Indian communities, yes, I would say it is prevalent. Specifically devotees, again, it would be interesting, wouldn't it, if we were to sort of do like a survey, like an anonymous survey, and see really what was going on. Maybe that's something that myself and other professionals in the devotee community could maybe do. But yes, it happens, and it happens behind closed doors. And the thing to remember is that nothing really is what it seems, ever. On social media, or even just in the community, you see families together, or you see a couple together, and the next moment you see they're divorced, or they're or something's going on, and that doesn't happen just suddenly. These things are happening from either day one or over time behind closed doors. Yeah, sorry.
So in terms of ISKCON, in terms of the ISKCON
Yeah.
community, the ISKCON devotee community, is there a significant or major issue with domestic violence? I mean, so we're kind of slightly moved away from kind of Asian, Indian cultural families, and I guess in that kind of group, I'm putting in the kind of white Western converts as well. Is there an issue with domestic violence in ISKCON?
I'm going to say that I'm probably not the best person to answer the question, because we do have, in England, we do, at least in London, we have this domestic violence support group called Devi. So they would probably be a better group to answer the question. But the fact that they exist, I would say yes.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, I'm just going to make a random comment now, and it's kind of linked and it's kind of not, but it's just, I'm just going to say it. It's not really what we're talking about today. One of the things that I find interesting is how, I have to watch what I say, people from similar backgrounds to myself, so kind of white Western backgrounds, will join movements like ISKCON that have their heritage in the part of the world we refer to as India. The married couples will start behaving like Indian couples. And I know, I'm not going to say any names, I know a number of English girls or ladies that are from liberal Western backgrounds that will get married in ISKCON, and their behavior just changes. And I'm not necessarily linking it to domestic violence at all. I'm just saying it changes. And I think, well,
more submissive.
Yeah, and they just seem like a completely different person, very submissive, that their husband is the master. And I know that there'll be maybe some sastric references for that, but it's just culturally from a world that I'm not from. You know, my mother and stepfather, my father left a long time ago. My mother and stepfather, they are pretty much equals, whatever that means. You know, they mutually make decisions, and the house belongs to them both. You know, and they're actually a good example of equality in marriage. I mean, my mum's probably quite bossy, to be honest, but it's just interesting how in Western converts will join ISKCON, and some of them, not all, will get married and then start to behave in a different way.
And maybe this is moving slightly off domestic violence, but we can really kind of touch upon the things that feed domestic violence, from the culture, the scripture, and things that get misused, like the husband is the guru, and so what does that mean, right? You have to listen to the guru, and so the woman, the wife, has to listen to what the man says, and and really it really boils down to immaturity, to be honest, because real true masculinity is I'm going to take it to the shastric meanings of masculinity and femininity, right? So you have the prakriti and the purusha, right? So purusha is the masculine, the divine masculine, and prakriti is the divine feminine, material nature, or just the feminine nature. So you have, purusha is the masculine, which is steady, unchangeable, the constant, the independent. So Krishna ultimately is the ultimate Purusha, because he's truly independent. His existence and his sense of self isn't dependent on the Prakriti energy or anything else. So, but the Prakriti nature, the feminine nature, is dependent. It's flowing, it's moving, it's changing, like Chanchala, right? Ever changing, like Lakshmi is considered to be Chanchala, always moving, always changing. So and they're both perfect, of themselves. They're both perfect, and they come together really beautifully and create everything that you see around us. Now, when we talk about us, our nature, we all have psychologically masculine and feminine energies. You know, we all have the ability to be independent and steady, and there's a part of us that will be quite strong in that way. And then there's a part of us that is feminine, right? Changing, always moving, always up and down. And when you look at this from the perspective of Jyotish, which I'm also interested in, but you look at the perspective of Jyotish, that everybody comes into this life with their karma, right? The soul enters into a body, and at the time of your birth, there's a snapshot of the sky that's made, which is your astrological chart. And in that astrological chart, there is the moon, which is feminine by nature. It has Venus, which is feminine by nature. And then you have Mars, and you have the sun, which is masculine in nature. So everybody's going to have a Mars and a sun in their chart influencing their mind and their life, and that everyone's going to have a moon and a Venus influencing their chart. So we're all made of the energies of masculine and feminine. So what I think men who take scriptural references and try to dominate women do not understand their true nature. They don't understand their nature. Just even on a material psychological level, let's forget about spirituality for a minute. Because if they really understood that, okay, I'm strong in this way, and my wife is going to be strong in this way, and how do we complement these masculine and feminine energies together? And the result of that might be that the man, the husband, might be more dominant in certain things, but it's not an excuse to dominate the woman. Does that make sense? And vice versa. The woman might be strong in some ways. It's not an excuse for the woman to dominate her husband, which I'll tell you, when we talk about domestic violence, I've heard and seen a lot of women abusing their husbands in ISKCON and outside. That issue is less talked about, because I think what happens is that a lot of women who abuse their husbands have been born and brought up without a strong male figure, a healthy strong male figure, or they have been abused themselves. And so what happens is their masculine energy becomes so exacerbated because they have to protect themselves, because they haven't been protected, and they end up then dominating the men in their lives, which is really, really damaging for the male ego and even themselves, because ultimately really deep down, a lot of these women want to be nurtured and taken care of, right? They're actually suppressing their feminine energy because they're having to, their masculine energy is on overdrive because no one's done it for themselves, themselves growing up. And it just, anyway, I could go on in tiny examples like this, but it just creates such an imbalance and dysfunction. So it really comes from, I guess, how people are born and brought up, how they then will take scriptural statements to then serve that perception that they already have, because they don't feel secure in themselves. They feel like they have to dominate other people to gain that security. But there are many scriptural statements that Prabhupada has said that the male ego, men have a problem with their ego, and actually women are very soft-hearted, and women are much more easily able to love Krishna because of their soft-hearted nature, and so these things get warped.
So Chaitanya Lila, in a moment, we're going to talk a bit about some solutions. We're going to some ideas that can support people dealing with mental health issues and trauma and abuse in institutions like ISKCON. But before we do, the other issue you mentioned about 15 minutes ago was this unfortunate issue of gurukul abuse. And it's an issue that people come to you about, they want support for in the Hare Krishna movement. And that's, I think that's the reason you and I first got in touch with each other about 3 or 4 months ago. I mean, this is episode 23. I think episode 17 or 18, we did a big podcast on child protection issues in ISKCON. And it was fantastic, actually, and it was well received, and you know, over 2,000 people around the world watched it, and I appreciate that, those devotees that took part in that. But you and I certainly got in touch with each other. You got in touch with me after that, and so I'm really keen just to touch on that briefly, because you have been involved to some extent with the campaign for greater child protection in ISKCON.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about that, and you know, why for you you're so passionately involved with it?
Yeah. There's an immediate burden that I feel, you know, when this topic comes up, because it's just, you know, it's so close to my heart. Like, I didn't go to gurukul, so I'm, you know, very blessed and fortunate to not have experienced the level of abuse that some of my, you know, brothers and sisters in ISKCON have. There's so much that I can say, and I'm going to try and refine my thought process as I go. And I think it, you know, I'm stuttering because it brings up so much emotion, and it should bring up so much emotion, because this is a part of ISKCON that is dark, evil, and should be rooted out. And it should be cleansed, and, you know, and just a new flourishing way in dealing with these issues should be brought about. I mean, I think, I'll talk about a few things.
Please.
Talk about the impact of abuse, number one, and then 2, I can touch upon policies, and responsibility, and perhaps looking at something a bit more positive, which is, what I would love to see happen, you know. So the first thing is the impact of abuse. I think what happens is, and I'm not going to talk about specific cases, because look, it's going to be the same across the board. But the thing is that these issues by leaders are not understood. The severity of the impact of childhood physical, psychological, sexual abuse in the gurukuls are not understood by the leaders enough, number one. And therefore, if they don't understand it, how are they going to be able to do anything about it to help? And, you know, making temples and making devotees, which is what, you know, leaders in ISKCON are focused on doing, it's one thing, but it's that doesn't create a society. Just having bricks does not create a society. What creates a society is how we have relationships with each other, and how we support each other's spirituality, how we support each other's growth. That's what a community is. It's not about just having temples and buildings and more new devotees and numbers and donations and money, because all of that will collapse at some point. You know, that's just material. That's material energy, right? When we talk about prakriti, it's changing. Buildings will come and go, money will come and go, but how we treat people will stay with the individual, because that is what will ultimately, you know, will come back to all of us karmically, right? And just because we're devotees doesn't mean that we don't have karma, right? So that's the thing. Leaders really need to understand the impact of trauma. It's not just something that happened 30, 40 years ago. No. Because, and the reason why I say this is because the impact of trauma is still current today. Because when a child is abused, that you literally write on the slate of that child's mind. you're defining that child based on those actions. That child then grows, feels like they are only worth something if they are of service to somebody, if they are sexually attractive to some. I mean, that's not our message in the Bhagavad Gita. Where does it say that? Yeah, that we define ourselves based on our ability to please someone in any which way. That's not it's so, that's what I mean by evil. It's wrong. And okay, abusers do not know that they're doing that, but they need to know. People need to know that when we abuse a child, or however we treat a child, we are writing on the slate of their mind. So children need positive validation, they need attention, they need love, they need unconditional love, and they need to be guided, and when that's not happening, and when they're being touched in the middle of the night, they're being beaten, because this is what's happened. You need to hear it. It's reality. This is what's happened. They've been beaten just for, not sweeping up properly. Like, I mean, the records are there. You can read them, on the child protection. But these are things that also I've heard personally as well, from victims and survivors of abuse. So that is the experience as a child. That child then grows up as an adult. They have been, their mind has been written on. It's samskara. What does samskara mean? Samskara means impression. Yeah, impression on the mind. It's like a groove, actually. Yeah. So in the mind, it's like a subtle groove. Now, wherever there's a groove, the water flows, the energy flows. So if the groove is, I'm worthless, I'm stupid, I need to be humble, lower than the blade of grass, because I'm just no good at anything, and I should always, surrender to the guru and the leader, and I can never be a leader. I mean, these are things that children have been told. Yeah, and then, I should please others by sexually molesting myself, or I should, there's all these psychological issues that go with that, subconsciously, unconsciously. So that's the groove that the energy is meant to flow. So what happens in that person's life? They then start to make decisions based on that. The types of partners that they pick can be abusive. They don't reach for certain goals because they don't think they're good enough. They then go to addictive patterns and habits because it's the only thing that's remedying the pain. And then they get labeled. Oh, they're just sense gratifiers. But gurukulis, they often get labeled they're just wild and sense gratifiers. Well, if they weren't so suppressed and treated like they were nothing, they might have actually felt some joy in their spiritual life, rather than just wanting to leave and run away and just absorb their mind in shooting heroin up their arm, because that's what's happened. So leaders can't just label these unimportant, smaller so-called devotees because, well, they're not doing grand and big things. Well, they could be. They could have been doing great things if they had been nurtured. So my point is that the impact of abuse is not something that happened 30, 40 years ago. The impact of abuse is now in people's lives now, and I've seen it. I've been a part of it. So that's really important. And so in terms of remedying that, leaders really need to understand the impact. They really need to have a conversation, like a real honest conversation with gurukulis, ex-gurukulis. And of course, when gurukuls are opened, well, I think the question should be, should there be gurukuls at the moment? If there aren't policies, recruitment processes appropriately in place, should there be gurukuls? I would say no, not if the structure isn't there. And obviously, because I work at university, and so we're all policies, procedures, standardized procedures have to be in place. So, for example, we follow safeguarding procedures and policies. So if there is a vulnerable person that hits certain risk markers, then that needs to be escalated to, so my staff will then escalate that to me, and I will then work with that case with the member of staff. And then if I feel that it needs to be escalated further, I'll escalate it to my boss. And then if it needs further escalation, we'll escalate it to the local, council, the local support networks, even the police or the hospital, whatever the situation is. So without those procedures in place appropriately and known about and followed, then abuse will happen, and it just will be unknown. It will happen behind closed doors, in the dark. And then we'll hear about it in 20 years time, oh, this happened. But then it's 20 years later, and then it's like, oh, well, that was 20 years ago, it doesn't matter. Well, no, because we're talking about it now, and something needs to happen now.
And in general, how do you think ISKCON, particularly ISKCON in the UK, how well do you think ISKCON in the UK is doing on addressing these issues?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, because I'm not directly involved in child protection. I get the impression that we are better than other countries. We have a great child protection team in London, and I do know that there are child protection officers in other centres. How well they're trained, etc., I'm not the person to ask, because I'm not involved in that. But in London, there's a great child protection team, and I know that that things do get dealt with when there are reports. So that's really great, and we need to celebrate those things.
I don't know if you saw, it was probably about 2 weeks ago on the news, the national news, the government had released the report into child abuse in religious institutions. So they'd done kind of mainstream Christianity a few months ago. This was non-mainstream Christianity and other religions, which technically, obviously, ISKCON or kind of Hindu, Vaishnava groups fall into that.
Hindu, Sikhs, Muslim, yeah, I read it, yeah.
And it was hugely sad, wasn't it? It was hugely, it wasn't shocking, if I'm honest. I wasn't shocked by the findings that basically there's been a whole failure of child protection, of protecting children in religious institutions. And I remember having a conversation with someone very senior in ISKCON in the UK about this about 4 or 5 months ago. And I said, we don't have to be like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't have to cover things up. We don't have to, we don't have to deal with things behind closed doors. The Jehovah's Witnesses would say, well, using them as an example, they'd say, well, we have our own processes and protocols, and that's great. But part of that, a big part of that, needs to be phoning the police, phoning the secular authorities, getting the social services team, getting the police involved. Religious institutions, any institution, should not be dealing, primarily really should be dealing with child protection, but certainly not on its own. And, I made it very clear to this senior leader in ISKCON a few months ago that ISKCON, and it does in the UK, I've kind of done my research and I've looked into things. ISKCON in the UK is much better than the countries. Which is really good. But we as an organization need to get a lot better at dealing with it and calling the police. It's very simple. Call the police. We should never cover things up.
Yeah, I would agree. I would even just say that if devotees are listening here and they ever come across abuse or unfortunately experience abuse themselves, just go to the police. we, you know, as a devotee community, Krishna consciousness here, we are not above the law, you know, and there's no, we can't use Shastra to justify misgivings and wrongdoings, and we can't. And or no, let's say we can, but there will be a consequence anyway. Karmically, there will be a consequence. And no one can you know, no one can avoid that, you know, because Krishna is the witness in our heart. Yamaraj is a witness to everybody. So we can't avoid that. And so yes, I think you're right. Devotees should just go to the police and seek support and guidance from the child protection team. And
I mean, I know a lot of devotees listening to this, and devotees that are not will be thinking, well, you know, ISKCON is Srila Prabhupada's organization, and we don't want ISKCON to have a bad name, and we don't want to drag ISKCON through the dirt, and we don't want to bring out these bad things that are happening. But you know, we have a moral duty to do this. We have a moral duty to make sure that abuse, in any type of abuse is never carried out. It's not acceptable. I mean, actually, ISKCON, in terms of its legal position, ISKCON UK is a registered charity within the UK. So it has to, like all other charities, follow all the laws of the land, all the protocols. And actually, we have a duty as a registered charity, and those that represent the charity in some way, to make sure we're following British law, you know, which is the same in most Western countries.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, I think actually the attitude should be that those who are abusing women and children, or abusing anyone, right? Because abuse happens also from women to men, but those who are abusing other vulnerable people or anyone are not a part of ISKCON. This is not what Prabhupada would want. Rather than, oh, this happened, let's cover it up because we want to put a really nice mask on, you know, and when, you know, it's just rotting inside, a part of it's just rotting inside. It should be the other way. It should be, let's be transparent and say, yes, we're a spiritual movement. There are some people in here that do not belong in here because they're not following what we and Prabhupada wanted. And that, you push out the disease, you detoxify in that way, rather than just, like I said, putting on a mask.
Chaitanya, can we talk a bit about, because we've been chatting for an hour, believe it or not, it's gone quite quickly. Can we chat a bit about solutions, ideas going forward? We've talked about trauma, abuse, and mental health issues in spiritual institutions. An example is the organization we're a part of, ISKCON. So what solutions, what would you recommend to devotees listening to this who are maybe experiencing abuse themselves? What do you recommend to them? What should they be doing?
Yeah. I would say that there are some internal things and then external things. Like, okay, I'll get the most obvious ones out the way. And I think it would be really nice to really talk about Krishna consciousness. So the obvious ones are, okay, if you are, you know, experienced or experiencing mental health challenges, be that depression, meaning that depression means not just, oh, I'm feeling low. And of course, if you're feeling low, then you need to attend to that as well. But you know, depression is, okay, you can't get up in the mornings, you can't eat, you can't sleep, or you're sleeping too much, you feel just a sense of complete, like you're in a black hole. That type of depression, clinical depression. If you're experiencing tremendous anxiety, panic attacks, constant worry, insomnia, those types of issues. If you've experienced trauma in the past that's coming back, because that's an area that I sort of specialize in, trauma, which is, you know, events that have occurred that are so shocking to the system, to the nervous system, and to the mind, that what happens is the person's mind is almost still stuck in that memory or stuck in that place. And so what happens is that memory and those emotions associated with that traumatic time or that traumatic memory gets replayed in the mind, or it gets triggered. And so that emotional state keeps coming back, right? Which is really, really distressing, and that's sort of PTSD symptoms. And that can really be debilitating because you're constantly stuck in these traumatized states, and you're not able to be free from that. You're not able to, just be more at peace, and focus on what's going on now, because your mind is stuck somewhere else. So things like that. I'm kind of describing these symptoms so maybe people can relate. If some people are experiencing psychosis, even hearing things, seeing things that aren't there, then I would certainly suggest to all of those individuals, main thing is go to your doctor. Go to your doctor and get support from that person. Your doctor is likely, this is in the UK, other countries will be different, but your doctor is likely to, offer you medication. Now that's completely up to you if you want to take. My personal opinion is it's not the cure and it's not the answer, okay? But medication can help kind of stabilize moods, so then you're able to go to therapy and deal with the root cause of the issues. So I would never say yes, take medication, or never no, don't take medication. It's really a personal choice, and really will depend on whether how severe someone's mental health issues are. Not everybody who has a mental health issue needs to see a psychiatrist, okay? Very rarely will you need to see a psychiatrist. So, you can just go to your doctor and seek a psychotherapist. If you do want to go to a psychotherapist or a counselor and to get that support, just make sure that they are accredited, and you'll be able to see whether they are BACP or UKCP accredited. And the other main thing is that they have experience. That would be obviously good. There are some good counselors and psychotherapists that are newly qualified and they're still good. But the other main thing is that they treat you like a human being. They don't treat you like a patient that needs fixing. That you're able to connect to them and relate to them, and that you feel good. It's really important that you need to trust your own intuition when you're seeking any form of relationship. Any relationship, trust your intuition, your gut reaction. So that's the sort of external things. I think it's really important to, if you're going through something, don't waste time in getting support. Just don't waste time. I know so many devotees that just kind of contemplate going to therapy, and they do that for years, and then they just suffer for years. And because I'm a therapist and because I work with these issues on such a deep level, I've seen change happen rapidly, and I've seen my clients come into therapy absolutely like suicidal, don't want to deal with life, depressed, so chaotic, and they leave after some sessions feeling like, wow, this has just really transformed my life. And then they end therapy, because therapy isn't meant to be lifelong, it's meant to be temporary, and they end therapy feeling more empowered that they can live their life. So just don't waste time. And then I think the more internal things is touching on Krishna consciousness, because we come from the philosophy that that says that really our connection to Krishna is ultimately what we need to realize, and all of these other things. And I think there's so much in Prabhupada's books and the philosophy that this material world is an illusion, or this material world just a sense of detachment, and that can exacerbate mental health problems, because if somebody already doesn't want to live in the world, then hearing that the world is just distressing and it's a horrible place to be can make somebody feel more of a reason to detach from their surroundings. And it really depends on the individual, how healthy they are in mind, and also how mature they are in their spiritual practice. So yes, it can help. Krishna consciousness, the philosophy, can help us all understand the nature of the world. That yes, we shouldn't depend on it for our sense of self. We shouldn't be, we don't need to chase after something external to make us happy, which actually we have everything inside of us. And it's true, because Krishna sits in our heart. And really that connection that we're all really trying to find in life can be found with him. So the internal shift, I would really say, is that yes, delve into your spiritual practice, delve into, really absorb yourself in chanting. And one thing that I think, it's not a regulative principle, or it's not something that's talked about much, but, talk to Krishna, talk to him. Just talk to him. He is our best friend. He's our best friend, and he will listen, and he's there. He's waiting. He's waiting there. When is this person going to turn to me? And when you do, your life will change. Okay, the external situations might not change. Okay, you still might have to deal with your karma that you have in your life, but that karma is given by Krishna so that you can turn to him, so that you can just purify whatever you need to in life and turn to him. And that's the main thing that I would say. When I was young, when I was 15, like I said, that's when I turned to Krishna consciousness more of my own volition. And that's what I used to do, because I didn't have anyone else to talk to when I was, at that time. It was a difficult time. I just used to talk to Krishna, and it was probably the most nourishing time spiritually, most difficult materially, externally, psychologically maybe, but yeah, really nourishing spiritually. I mean, I felt so close to Krishna because he reciprocates. So he is the ultimate answer. I'm not one of those psychotherapists, devotee psychotherapists that, just we need to do all these mental exercises. No, Krishna consciousness really is, but real Krishna consciousness, really connecting to Krishna. And that will transform your perception of what you're going through.
I mean, I can speak to that from the perspective that, I mean, I wouldn't say that I ever really suffered from depression, but I would have low times like any other human being.
Yeah,
and, you go through difficulties in life. And it wasn't until I really read Srila Prabhupada's books and I read the Bhagavad Gita and I recognized all these disturbances around me were just temporary. They weren't going to last forever. And sometimes when you're in the midst of that difficult situation, you think it's going to last forever. I'm going to feel this way forever. But actually, Krishna consciousness reminds us, it tells us, it teaches us that these things are all temporary, that they will not last forever, these negative, horrible things. And actually, the eternal is Krishna. Krishna is our best friend, and he is eternal. And, so I actually find it very enlightening and liberating that the Supreme Lord, God, Krishna, was there to help. And you talked about talking to Krishna, and you're absolutely right. Certainly in Krishna consciousness, in the Hare Krishna movement, we don't talk about that enough. And my kind of background's in kind of interfaith dialogue and looking at different religious traditions. And I think other religious traditions, probably Christianity, they're a lot better at talking to God, and certainly we don't, in Krishna consciousness, we don't have something called intercessory prayer. So if you go to church, you'll have intercessory prayer, where you'll ask God for things. Sometimes those things aren't very good, but you'll ask the Lord for things. You'll ask for help. You'll ask for forgiveness. And we don't do that, or we don't do it enough. And I think certainly we should, in terms of, because it will benefit our relationship with Krishna.
Yes.
If you're in a relationship with someone, anyone, of course the relationship's going to get better if you talk to them and spend time with them. If you never spend time with them, you don't talk to them. That's quite a terrible relationship if you think about it.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful point. It's such a beautiful point, because on one hand, we'll read, Prabhupada will say, our relationship with Krishna is not a business transaction. We don't just, but he's talking to the culture of Hindus that will go to the temple, please allow my son to get their promotion, or get
a good job, nice wife, big car,
married, and, he's really talking about that. And I think what you're saying is right about any relationship will only improve with communication. And so if somebody really is struggling and needs something, who better to go to than Krishna? If that's the level that you're at, because the ultimate level is that a pure devotee doesn't need anything. Whatever they get, they accept as Krishna. But not everybody is at that level. So people do have desires still, and that's the process of purification. And the only way that will be purified is if you go to Krishna with it. And actually that is single pointed devotion. If whatever you're going through, whatever you have, you go to Krishna, then you're practicing bhakti, right? Rather than artificially suppressing it, trying to detach yourself from it in the name of trying to be a pure devotee, and then real psychological issues start to come out. So yeah, it's a beautiful point.
Did you want to share any other solutions? We've talked quite a lot, and it's been a wonderful conversation over the last hour and 15 minutes, I think. And I think we've really drawn out some really important issues about trauma, abuse, mental health issues. And it's really good to come up with some of those solutions. So there's the kind of material world's obvious solutions about getting support from a professional. And then the spiritual solutions. Taking up Krishna consciousness. That's what we're trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe I've really I've pendulated there really to the extremes. And I think other things that I think devotees can do, that very simple solutions, exercises, is, journaling, writing, because we are in a movement of self-reflection, and, manana, right? Means we need to meditate on certain principles. And I think a lot of devotees are very good at that generally. They read something, then reflect, they share in a sangha. That's great. But also just on your own psychological challenges or your own life challenges, write, just write, because the answers are actually inside. A therapist, a good therapist at least, will help the person find their own answers and help them to go inwards, rather than just telling them what they think they should do. So yeah, writing, self-reflection. I would also say just having this, okay, it's obvious, right? Sattvic, healthy lifestyle, like eating healthy home-cooked food. I really don't like to eat out, even in devotee restaurants, I'll be honest. Home-cooked prasad is just, there's nothing like it. And the more that you eat that, the more your taste will, become more sattvic. So, yes, having a healthy, balanced lifestyle, and relationships. I think this is an important one, actually. Talking about the celebrity culture, find, even if it is just one person that you can reveal your mind to and have a deep, meaningful connection with, relationship with, a friendship with, is really, really important. I think that in the world of social media and celebrity culture, it's sort of, okay, I've heard and can see that there's a tendency of, I want to be friends with the popular crowd, or I want to be friends in, or or even, kind of older devotees where they've been burnt out so much, because they've done so much service, and now they're, in the later years of their life, and they don't have people to connect to. It happens. I've spoken to Prabhupada disciples that go through this, sadly. And so if you can just find one friend that really you can connect to, it doesn't matter who they are, that's the main thing, because friendship is really important. So, and it's rare to find good friends, isn't it? So yeah.
Chaitanya Lila, you have a YouTube channel which which is wonderful. Tell us a bit about your YouTube channel and some of the kind of films that you produce.
Yeah, I mean, it's up and down. You know, I think I started that YouTube channel so long ago because I wanted to. Yeah, I just wanted to share, you know, these things, psychological topics. You know, but it's not been something that's been my main focus, my main job, so to speak, because I work at the university, I work with clients. So the YouTube channel it's up and down. Yes, I would appreciate the support. Please go and subscribe, and
I'll put a link to the YouTube channel above or below this podcast. I'll put a link to your channel so people can see it.
That's right. I mean, I am going to be doing more on there, and in times to come, things will be I have a feeling it'll be interesting, the things that I'm going to be doing. But yeah, currently, you know, I sort of just take something and I like to analyze it, and I'll just put something out there.
Recently, I mean, an interesting one, I'm just going to come out here and say it, an interesting one you did recently, I think, was on the psychology of a pimp.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, not something we talk about often in Krishna consciousness and the Hare Krishna, but it was a fascinating film about the psychology of a pimp.
Yeah.
And you talked about it in depth, and it was just really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, you know, there are all sorts of people in this world, and they all belong here, and they all are meant to be who they're meant to be, right? Because the world is Krishna's world and Krishna's energy, and everything is perfectly imperfect. So, you know, it's an interesting thing, pimp psychology, I think I've called it. And because you get some characters, and you get these characters also within ISKCON, not pimps, but
I hope not.
That'll be another problem, wouldn't it? But what I refer to in that video is the narcissistic type of personality, the charming, right, but the very manipulative and very abusive. And I've come across them in ISKCON as well. So, you know, that anyone who is extremely charming, you know, who is just making you feel like so wonderful, you know, just be careful. But yes, that was something that I did. And I talked a little bit on that video at the end about prostitution, actually, and how in Vedic culture, prostitution has been a valid job for women. But pimping is something I think in Kali Yuga that is it's very abusive. And yeah. But yeah, I'll be doing more interesting things. Let's see.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. Chaitanya Lila, it's been fantastic and wonderful to have you as the guest on the podcast this week.
So much. It's been great chatting to you.
Really, really appreciated your time. And you know, I'll be sharing the link to your YouTube channel so devotees can look at it. And also, those of you watching, listening, please do, if you feel that you need to rewatch this podcast, because Chaitanya's really shared some really important stuff that you might want to listen to again, particularly on some of those solutions of how we can deal with mental health issues, you know, and so please do watch it again. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please do like it. Please do put a positive comment. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please do share it and like it or love it. Or care for it. So the fourth one is be angry about it. We hope you're not angry about this podcast. So
they can express all their emotions.
Yeah, I mean, they can be angry about, I mean, there's some of the issues that we've talked about they might want to be angry about, but I hope they're not angry about this particular podcast happening. Yeah, so thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you all on the next edition of the Hare Krishna's in Britain podcast. Thank you. Hare Bo.